So let's talk about xeriscaping and get away from teens. So how can you tame that water-thirsty yard? Xeriscape. Just a quick etymology lesson. I'm an English teacher. The part xera comes from Greek xeros, which means dry, and scape means a picture. And it is pronounced xeriscape. There is no zero in it. So this is a dry picture. And these two pictures that are showing here are xeriscapes. They do not have to be all rocks. In fact, they shouldn't be. So does your yard look like this? You know, the typical foundation planting, lots of grass, and a tree. That's kind of standard. Would you rather it looked more like this? This was my house in Shirts right before I moved, and I had gotten rid of a ton of grass and had planted lots of plants and had lots of butterflies and pollinators and all kinds of stuff. Or you might want it to look like this again, and this was in the fall in my yard here. Lots of pollinators in that. So you want to avoid doing the pictures on the left. In no part of the 7 principles of xeriscape do they discuss using all rocks. And if you're in Texas, and especially where y'all are, because you get more rain than we do, this is going to be miserable to maintain. And one of the handouts that I did send is why using rocks like this is not good. And this was an article written for the San Antonio water system. They will not give you credit if you take your grass out and replace it with rocks. You get no credit whatsoever for getting rid of that grass. And there are many reasons for that. One is it really isn't a good principle to use. And people say, oh, it's low maintenance. Not really. The weeds come up in that like mad. But if you use Xeriscape, the pictures on the right, those are Xeriscapes. They have reduced their lawn. In fact, the one on the bottom doesn't look like it have much lawn at all. And they have put in perennials and probably some annuals that bloom, and they're pretty and they attract wildlife. So, what are the basic principles of Xeriscape? Well, first, reduce the amount of lawn. You should try to reduce it by at least 50%. More than that is better, but if you can get rid of half of it, that would be great. You need to develop a good plan. It has to be something that you like and it works for you. You want to remember that you group plant materials that are similar. So if you have plants that don't want much water at all, you will group those together. If you have some, like maybe some ferns or something like that, that might want a bit more, you want to group those together. Basically, cacti and ferns do not get along well when they are planted in the same flower bed with each other. So remember that. You need to consider your regional ecosystem. How much rain do you normally get? What kind of critters have you got? What kind of soil have you got? What grows there naturally? And you will have microclimates. For instance, in your house, if you have a section that has kind of an L shape to it, so that part of it is shaded or part of it is sheltered from cold wind, that's a microclimate. And you can grow some things that you couldn't grow out in the middle of your yard in a microclimate. So be aware of those. They can be very handy. Whatever your landscape design is, you have to accommodate what you've already got that cannot be moved. For instance, the footprint of your house, your driveway, sidewalks, probably you don't want to replace. Now, those can be moved, but it is expensive and a lot of work. If you have a utility easement, you're not going to move that. If you've got some big trees that are functioning well, you're not going to want to move those. So think about what you already have, where it is, and realize you're going to have to work around it if that's just the way it is. And of course, any good landscape design, you have to be able to afford it. So that might mean that you do a lot of it yourself. It can be done. I did it. Another basic principles is that you choose xeric, meaning dry loving plants, and that's your natives. If you get natives for your area, they will be more happy than if you get something from further in East Texas, where it's going to expect an acid soil and a lot more rain. So keep that in mind. You may have to amend your soil, but not necessarily. If you are getting natives that are adapted to your area, you shouldn't have to do any kind of amendment. Now, you will do mulching. You might want to add some compost that helps get the critters that make your soil fertile, but it will be minimal. Remember that nature does not like bare ground, and you need to mulch it so that you preserve what moisture is there and also to keep the temperatures under control. It will keep the temperatures cooler now in the summertime because it shades the ground, and it will keep it warmer in the winter whenever we get a cool front. So it's a good modulation. You definitely want to use water efficiently. That's the whole idea here, is that you're going to use water better and use less. So you need to consider what kind of irrigation system, if you have one, and you don't have to have one. You need to practice good maintenance, and that means you are going to avoid chemicals. That is chemical fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, if at all possible. You want to get back to the natural environment as much as you can. And that isn't going to happen overnight because we have used so much of this stuff on our land. It takes a while for it to work its way out. And the critters that are going to help you control other critters need to get reestablished. And that takes time. So be patient. What turf you have, you need to mow correctly. And how high it should be depends on the turf. So you need to find out how high or low you should mow that grass and how often you should mow it. If you can leave it a little bit taller, it helps because it shades the roots and they don't need as much water. You also need to prune your natives correctly. And this is where it gets tricky because most of us are used to the pass-along plants, the heirloom plants that are not necessarily native. And as a general rule, natives require less maintenance. You don't prune them all the time. And many of them don't respond at all well when you prune them too much. They will kind of give up the ghost and say, "You don't like me? I'm gone." So this is where some learning takes place, and this is where classes can definitely help. And then kind of look around and observe. But basically, you don't want to putter over your plants, and I know that frustrates some people. So getting started, how do you get started? Well, the first thing you have to do is decide what your goal is. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it to save water? Most likely. Are you doing it so that your landscape is not as much work? That's also a possibility if you choose the right plants. Do you just want to change up the landscape and use it more creatively? These are questions that you have to ask yourself and answer. Because if you just go, "Oh, I'm going to do a xeriscape, I'm going to go buy, a bunch of native plants and I'm going to stick them in here," you're probably not going to be happy. You really do need to think it through. Where do you want to put those plants? What kind of plants do you want to get? A lot of things that you need to consider before you launch into it. You need to get ideas, and to do that, look around. Look in your neighborhood, look in your area. What kind of plants do you see growing that seem to be doing well? What kind of design do you like? Do you want a wildscape, or do you want a more cared for look, kind of an informal landscape? You can do formal landscapes with natives. It is possible. But you have to be careful because that a formal landscape requires a lot of clipping and is a lot of work. Implement your plan as you can. I can tell you from sad experience, do not try to do it all at one time. You'll hate yourself. and you'll also probably be pretty darn sore, and you might make yourself hurt. So my advice would be, what bugs you the most? What do you want to get rid of the most? And start there. It might be in the front yard, it might be in the backyard. Wherever it is, start there. And as you are doing this, celebrate. When you get one of your projects done, sit back and look at it and admire it. It's good. You need to pat yourself on the back. Just a short study. This was the house that I bought in 1999 in Schertz, Texas. And for the most part, the only thing I had done before this picture was taken, there's a little bitty tree right here in the middle, and I had that planted. That was a red oak. And the reason I planted it was that these double windows right back there were my dining room, and my house faced west. And I really wanted to get some shade to knock that sun out of my dining room. But other than that, that's what it looked like. A very typical yard, tons and tons of St. Augustine grass. There was a larger pecan tree that had to be taken out because it was just too big. And right over on the far left, you will see some green coming in. That was my neighbor's oak tree, and that had to be one of the fastest growing oak trees I think I have ever seen. I had to have it trimmed back by an arborist a couple of times before I sold that house. It was a happy tree. But it had the boxwood up here in the front, all trimmed very nicely, which I didn't want to do, and a few little flower beds around the trees. That was about it. So it's pretty plain. That's what it looked like 5 years later. That little bitty stick of a tree had grown quite a bit. It's well over the top of the house. My neighbor's tree, you can see where some trimming had been done on it. It was coming in to visit me. I had changed out the boxwood, and let me tell you, boxwood has got fantastic roots. It was a chore. I'd taken out a huge swath of the St. Augustine grass. The hell strip out front had no grass in it, did not have to be mowed and edged, and I did have blooming things in it. So a lot had changed in 5 years. This is 3 years after that, and that little stick of a tree has grown tremendously, and it was giving me shade from the west sun in my dining room, which I really did appreciate. You can see that the hell strip was colorful. This was in May. And so I had all kinds of things blooming. I had butterflies. In fact, my next door neighbors had two little boys that would come out with their little butterfly nets, and I had the Greg's mist flower right over near the little tree. And of course, the butterflies go to that like mad. And they would come out, and I had to always tell them, I don't care how much you look, you just can't catch them. And I actually caught their father, who was an elementary school teacher, out there one day, and they were trying to catch butterflies. He looked like he was the kid with his hand in the cookie jar when I caught him. But it did attract lots of things, and my neighbors all loved walking by the house and complimented me on how pretty it was. And that's what it looked like when I sold it a year later. The sad story is the guy who bought it didn't want to fool with any of that stuff. He did tell us in advance, and he said, you can take anything you want, just don't leave a hole. And we didn't. So the Native Plant Society, the Master Gardeners, my family, my friends, my neighbors, we dug and we took a ton of plants out of there and took them with us. And now that house looks very similar to what it looked like when I moved in, with lots of St. Augustine grass. So it was lovely, but it didn't work for him. This is the house I live in right now. This is what it looked like when I bought it. It had a little street tree. It had over on the left side, there was a crepe myrtle that never did well and lots of grass. The thing I couldn't understand, right by the opening that goes into the porch, there were two rose bushes that were not very friendly. And so as we were moving in, my family was commenting on them, and those were the first two things to be dug out, were those two rose bushes, because they were mean. Here is what my house looked like in 2016. So this was 7 years later. I've added some things. That little stick of a tree has grown beautifully. It's a chinkapin oak. I did have a retama tree over on the left, but unfortunately, my oak was growing so fast and my neighbor's oak was growing toward my little retama tree, and it had to go. I was sorry. It was very pretty, but there wasn't room for it. Too small a lot. So it grew consistently. So let's look at some ideas. What can you do with xeriscape that would be pretty? If you don't want any grass at all, this was a yard in San Antonio. You notice that it has a sidewalk that's gravel. They've put down the metal edging to keep it in place, but the rest of the yard is planted in something, or it's mulched with, looks like a hardwood mulch. So this works great. Very low maintenance, pretty, and it has color. For small areas, this is in my backyard. I have this arbor, which I have stuff trained on, and a bird bath. And I found that when I keep my bird bath clean, all of the little plants that I've got growing around it stay really nice and green. They are beneficiaries of that. Or you could do, like on the right, a mulched walkway. This person used bricks along the side and then put in seasonal flowers. This is a rock rose here. I can't really tell what some of the others are. They're a little bit of a distance. But just put in perennials that are not going to be a lot of work and pruning. This is my backyard. I did a mixed hedge where I didn't use one thing twice. The Cenizo really loved it. It was in full bloom when this picture was taken. But I've also got over to the far right, I have a beautyberry, an American beautyberry. And we're currently having a little experiment with that beautyberry because the tree that you can see in the background is my neighbor's tree. And when we had Snowmageddon several years ago, that was an Arizona trash tree. And it did not do well, but they didn't cut it down. The roots were still alive, and so I lost most of the shade. That's where my shade for my beautyberry had come from. And now it just has suckers all over it, and it's kind of a mess. So I have a beautyberry that's growing in almost full sun, and surprisingly, it's doing quite well. So that was one of those experiments that turned out great. You also see a fountain here. That fountain was in my yard when I moved in. I'd always wanted a fountain. I thought it'd be so cool. And I found out it wasn't as cool as I thought it was. First of all, it was really hard to keep clean. And secondly, whenever we went into any kind of water rationing, you had to turn your fountains off. So it was dry most of the time. And so I decided, well, if it's going to do that, I'm just going to plant it. So my daughter brought her hammer drill. I didn't know there was such a thing. And she put holes in the bottom of these two layers of the fountain so that it would drain. And I planted it. And it is still planted just like that, except I've now taken this top part off. It's gotten smaller, shorter and shorter. But you'll notice that around it, it is mulched. I did have a gravel mulch right underneath the fountain, and then I had plants, or I still have plants around the outer edge of this circle, and they're mulched with leaves and hardwood mulch. Very easy to take care of. You can do a dry creek bed. Now, this is one place where you can use rocks because you need them. But this person put in a dry creek bed, and then these are the little dwarf yaupons that they have sculptured. Actually, dwarf yaupons pretty much grow in that kind of a shape. So if you don't want to be the one out clipping them to make them look perfect, you can just let them do their own thing, and they're much easier to care for. On the left is the hell strip. That was in front of my house when I first moved in. That was the grass that came out first. You can see the back over here. There is still San Augustine grass in my front yard. But I got it out of that hell strip because it was such a mess to keep up with. I just didn't want to do it. And I put in a combination of grasses, some perennial wildflowers, and I did have a few annual wildflowers, although it converted over to pretty much all the perennials, so they kept coming back. Or on the right, you could do a restful retreat. You can see way over in the corner, there's a chair where you could sit and just chill. And they've got some red yucca here in the front. Looks like they have got some Turk's cap, or I can't tell if it's Turk's cap or if it's, I think it may be a salvia, back near some kind of a larger, probably a small tree. And they are using stepping stones, which is another good way that you can use rocks if you don't make them impervious. You have to leave the spaces between the rocks so that the water can soak through. So when you do get rain, even though you've got stones there, it can still soak into your land, which you want to keep all the water you can get. Smaller things, this is in my backyard. This is a bulb bed. These are not necessarily natives, but they come up and bloom at different times of the year. And then I did a bottle tree. And no, I didn't empty all those bottles. I helped, but I didn't empty them all. And I have since given a lot of blue bottles away. People see it and they want a blue bottle tree too. This is what the repurposed fountain looks like now. I did come back with a barrel cactus, and I found out that if it gets cold enough, they do freeze. And I lost that one. So I now have it in a pot that I can move more easily. So if we have Snowmageddon again, I will not lose my barrel cactus. This is a tiny little rain garden that somebody put in there in that hell strip. So xeriscaping can be very small if you want it. And on the right, I thought this was a very interesting use of rocks. They're the larger ones, but they just put them in a strip and they're holding them in place with metal edging so that they don't get out into the yard. Now, if you've got kids, you may not want to do that because there's nothing kids like to do better than throw rocks. But I thought that was very pretty. They are the tumbled river rocks. Some suggested native plants, trees. These are all for your area. And I use the Gulf Coast prairies and marshes as your ecoregion. That's your level 3 ecoregion. And one of them is the American sycamore, which is a nice, it has big leaves. It has the balls that fall off, the seed balls. And it does make a nice shade tree for your yard. It will grow in part sun, or shade. It doesn't really care, which is kind of nice. The sugar hackberry, and don't start screaming. It is not a trash tree. I know it has that reputation. It is not. It is one of the best wildlife trees you can plant. It is really, really great for birds, especially migrating birds, because the little berries, the little sugar berries that this tree puts on are very high in calories. And so birds who are getting ready to fly across the Gulf of Mexico can kind of beef up by eating these berries, are the ones who are coming back the other direction, coming over the Gulf and coming into the coastline. These are some of the first trees they look for because it's high energy and that's what they need. So these are great trees. Now, don't plant them close to your house or any kind of an outbuilding because they are brittle and they will drop a limb for whatever reason. So if it does, you want it out like the tree in the picture here. It's out where if it drops a limb, it's not going to make any difference. It's not going to knock anything down. So that's your consideration with the sugar hackberry. And they grow in sun or part sun. The eastern red cedar, this is an evergreen. It's kind of hard to find evergreens in our natives, but this is a nice one that again will grow just about anything anywhere you want it, sun, part shade, or shade. And it has a nice smell to it, and it has the berries, which the wildlife can use. Small trees and large shrubs. The parsley hawthorn is a possible one that grows in shade. It's again can be hard to find natives that like to grow in the shade, but this is one of them. It blooms in the spring, and this is a picture of it in bloom, and then it sets red berries later, which will attract critters, birds and squirrels and whatever, to feed on them. And of course, the flowers in the spring will attract your pollinators. So it's a very pretty, kind of a loosely, it's not real substantial, but it is pretty and good for the wildlife. Possum Haw Holly, I've got one of these and I just love it. It's carefree, and these berries, which will be on it in the fall, uh, everything loves it. And every year I watch the cedar waxwings come through in February, and usually I still have a goodly number of berries on the tree. And they and a mockingbird and a cardinal will duke it out on who's going to protect that tree and who's going to eat the berries. And I can tell you now, neither the mockingbird nor the cardinal win, because they get tired and they fly off, and in come the cedar waxwings to gobble, gobble, gobble and eat them all. They can strip my tree in a half day. It's really funny. But now only the females have got berries. So the best time to buy one of these trees is in the fall, when if they're going to have berries, they will. But you do have to have the male and female. I actually bought a male tree because I had no idea if there'd be any in my vicinity because I'm in town. I probably didn't need to. I was told later that if there is a male tree within a 5 mile radius, you're probably good to go. But I have mine right there, so I have lots of berries every year. And these grow in sun or shade, and you've probably seen them growing along fence rows because the birds eat the berries and then deposit the seeds where they're sitting. Yaupon holly, this is easy to grow. It is an evergreen. Again, it blooms in the spring and then puts on the red berries. Um, they seem to be some of the last that are eaten. I don't know. I was told that they need to go through several freezes, which tends to make them sweeter. Now, I don't know about that. I've never tasted them, but I do know that they're some of the last berries in my yard to be eaten. And they do great. They can grow in sun or part shade. They're very amenable to whatever, and they can get good sized. The wax myrtle. This is a great, if you need a hedge, you want to do a mixed hedge. This is a good one because it is evergreen. It's a bird tree because if you see over here on the far left, in the fall, they have these little blue black berries on them that the birds enjoy. And I had some until Snowmageddon, and mine got frozen. But until then, I had birds that would nest in them because my my plants had gotten up as high as the house, and the birds seemed to really like the way they grew. So I have quite a few nests in them. So a good bird tree too, as well as great for giving you some privacy. Shrubs, American beautyberry. This is another one that it has little flowers that are not particularly noticeable, that do attract pollinators, but then they set these gorgeous magenta berries, and the birds like them. I'd always thought it'd be so cool if I could decorate my Thanksgiving table with some of these berries. I've never been able to do it because there's never been any berries left. They have been totally stripped by all the critters, and that's fine. That's good. The button bush, this one takes a little more water, but it gets its roots down and it can pretty much take care of itself. It grows in shade and part shade, and again, something that can be hard to find. It gets fair sized, and it has these little button looking blooms that are really very pretty. So something to consider if you want to cover a good sized area. You could put this in a hedge and do a mixed hedge and have some of these. The coral bean, these are absolutely gorgeous. And when they bloom, the picture over on the right shows you just how beautiful they are. And then they produce berries. I understand that they can be poisonous. You want to be a little careful with them. So, if you have animals that like to go munching, you may not want to put this in. But they will grow in sun or part shade, and they get pretty good sized. They can get pretty tall. And then when they put on these blooms, they're just exquisite. I have seen them in hedges in San Antonio, so I know they do well there. And they are in your ecoregion. The late flowering bone set. This is a part shade plant again. I didn't realize I had chosen this many shade plants, but they seem to be the ones that are problematic, that they're really hard to come by. This is another great pollinator plant. Anytime you have these bunches of little flowers together, the pollinators really appreciate it. And it's kind of like one-stop shopping. They can stop on one of those groups of flowers and they can sip from several and they don't have to fly. So they're just like us. They don't want to spend any energy they don't have to. But this would be a nice shrub to fill in with. Perennials, the butterfly Guara. Um, I've heard several names for it, but it does, they're when they bloom, you can see the stalk on the right. It kind of does look like butterflies on them, especially if they're blowing in the wind. And this is a Lindheimer plant. And being from New Braunfels, which is the home of Lindheimer, we kind of look for the Lindheimer plants to put in our yards. But it's easy to grow. It is a perennial. It will die back in the winter, but it will come back the next spring. It's a very interesting plant. The blue mist flower, this is another great pollinator. Again, it's those bunches of flowers that they really appreciate, and they will flock to these flowers whenever they're in bloom. This can grow in sun or part shade, doesn't matter, and it is from your ecoregion. The green milkweed, if you're concerned about monarchs, this is one that does need full sun. Uh, and it will attract pollinators, but it is the host plant for monarchs. That's the main thing we're concerned about. So this is one to consider, and it is one that is native to your area. The seaside goldenrod. Goldenrod gets a bad rap. Everybody thinks that goldenrod causes allergy, and that's not true. What's causing the allergy is a totally different plant, but they all bloom at the same time. And because goldenrod is just so full of flowers, everybody assumed that's what was causing the problem, and that's not true. So you can grow this and not be guilty about causing anybody to have an allergic reaction. It's not doing it. These do need sun. So if you've got a bright area in the fall when they do this, they are just gorgeous. And they will spread and get thicker. So it's an easy to grow plant. Prairie parsley. Now this one's unique. It is a biennial, which means that it comes up the first year. Basically, it stays small and it puts its roots down. And then the second year, it sends up its blooms. And this is the kind of plant, kind of like standing cypress, which is also a biennial, that you want to get a cycle going because you want to have plants blooming, but you also want to have the little 1 year ones underneath them so that the next year you will have blooms on them. The annuals, the partridge pea is a pretty good sized annual and very pretty. I understand that it's a good wildlife plant. And if you're trying to cover a lot of area, you can see it gets fair sized. So it would be nice to have. It will come back every year. It'll die down. The American basket flower, really pretty. And you'll notice that the bumblebees like it. And bumblebees are having some bad times right now. So anything we can do to help them would be good. These get pretty tall. I had some in my yard the last couple of years, and they get up 4 and 5 feet tall. So they're big, but they are annuals. They will not stay there forever. They set seeds. And the reason they're called basket flowers, I'd often wondered, if you will look at the flower in the center and look underneath the petals, and you see that kind of basket-looking holder underneath. That's where the name comes from. It looks like a basket underneath there. And when the leaves fall off and they go to seed, the seeds are all down in that basket. Kind of clever. It says sun or part sun. I am finding that mine really want as much sun as they can get, and they were leaning out of the flower bed to get more. So I think next year they're going to get moved to a full sun location. The lazy daisy, this is a cute little flower that you could put along the edge of a sidewalk or whatever. It doesn't get very tall, but it's very cheerful with its little daisy look with the yellow center and the little white petals on it. It will grow in sun or part sun and would be nice in the front of a bed because it is small and it looks like it cascades over the edge of the sidewalk. So it's very attractive. Horse mint, the Monarda citriodora. It's in the Monarda family. Monarda is known as bee balm, if that tells you anything about who comes to it. It does come in 3 colors. This is the purple. There's also a white and there's a pale yellow. And they all attract, they're all Monardas and they all attract lots of pollinators and bees in particular. It will freely reseed. It's amazing how many can come up from all the little seeds that are inside. You can see in this picture to the left, down in there, that's where the seeds are kept. And so as the stalks blow after the flowers have gone away and the seeds are ready, those little containers that you see down close to the stem open up. And so every time the wind blows these back and forth, it's throwing seeds. So you will get lots of these, but that's not a bad thing. So ground covers, the creeping spot flower is a really cool little plant. Stays low, has bright, pretty yellow blooms on it, and is a really good, it's a perennial ground cover. Easy to grow, grows most anywhere. So something to think about if you're doing your xeriscape. Doesn't like a lot. It does like sun. So if you have a hell strip, that strip between the sidewalk and the street that's just full blasting sun, this would do it for you. Frog fruit, another very dependable. It has these little tiny flowers that have always reminded me of the old-fashioned kitchen matches, but they are the favorites of the little bitty pollinators. And it also helps some of the more beneficial insects that will go in and kill bad insects. And they tend to like some of these little flowers. In the sun, it can be really, really thick. It's not quite as thick in the shade, but it wants to grow. And it's easy if you want to propagate it. It grows from cuttings very, very easily. And it's just cheerful. If you want to, after it is finished blooming, you can mow it to keep it a little bit lower if it's gotten a little bit too high. But it's a really great little plant. If you've got a shady area, this is the wood fern or the river fern. I understand it's the same species. I understand that if you're in the more western part of Texas, it's called wood fern. No, other way around. If you're in the eastern part of Texas, it's called wood fern because it does grow in the woods. If you're in the more western part, it's called river fern because that's where you find it. So it's the same plant. It also grows at the end of your air conditioner drain. That's where this one is growing. That's in my yard. And it's a real happy camper because it gets that condensate off of the air conditioner. It grows in shade or part shade. It can take some sun. It's better if it's morning sun than afternoon. That's so hot. Vines. The swamp leather flower, which I think is gorgeous. I've got the red leather flower, the scarlet leather flower, but I think this one is really beautiful. It's in the clematis family. And they're pretty well disciplined. They're not rambunctious. They're not going to take you. And their blooms are just lovely. And many of them are pollinated by hummingbirds because these are kind of tubular flowers, and that's what hummingbirds look for. So it would be very interesting to have in your yard. It would need to be on some kind of a fence or a trellis to keep it up. The purple passion flower is also an easy to grow. This is the host plant for the Gulf fritillary butterfly. And I have actually had my passion flowers defoliated. I mean, down to just the sticks and stems, and it didn't kill them. They came back. But there were lots of caterpillars and lots of little baby butterflies that came off of that. So you can let it be defoliated and it will not hurt it. You don't want to spray it. Just let it do its thing. It's used to that and it will come back. Now, the downside with passion flowers is that they do lots of root sprouts. And if you'll notice the one on the right in the picture, they have it out. Looks like you could mow around it pretty easily, and that's probably a good thing. You could mow those root sprouts and not have to deal with them, or you can dig those root sprouts and give away baby plants, or put them in your plant sale if you're a plant sale. They also have this green thing over here on the left is a maypop, and that's its seed. And it'll turn kind of a yellowish, but it starts out as a green like that. And that's what this perfectly gorgeous flower turns into when it goes to seed. Grasses. Cherokee sage. Sages are becoming more popular. They're not a turf. They grow in clumps, but they serve the purpose of turf. And you can use these to cover up areas that you don't want to mow, but you don't want it to be, 5 feet tall. And some of these are evergreen. I don't know if this one is or not, but they are lovely. There are a bunch of them that are being brought into the nursery trade now, and they are from your area. Another perennial is the Gulf muley grass, and this picture shows it in bloom. It does this in the fall. If you plant these in just long drifts where you have a whole lot of them together, they are gorgeous, especially if the sun is behind them. It really does highlight that pinkish bloom that they're doing. They do reseed freely. My daughter put in a bunch of these. She lives in Austin, and she had a very curved area in her front yard. And so she put in a drift that went along her driveway and then along the sidewalk. And neighbors are constantly stopping saying, "What is that? It is gorgeous." So easy to take care of. That's literally the good thing about your grasses. It does need sun. If it gets too much shade, it's not going to be this pretty. But put it in the sun, turn it loose, and it's great. Now, if you do want some grass in the shade, there are the inland sea oats. I think they're beginning to be called wood oats. I think that's another name that's coming in. But you'll notice how the heads droop. And so if there is any wind whatsoever in your garden, these will move. And so it gives you some really pretty movement in your garden, which is kind of nice. The birds eat the seeds, and they also use the leaves for nesting materials. So it helps and I think I think it's skippers that use these for in the wintertime as shelter. So, it will touch several different critters. It can take sun. It's really happier in part shade. So, questions?
I am looking to see if we have any questions for you. Let's see. I have a question.
Yeah.
For you. So I know you're focusing on the coastal prairies and marshes, but we have people from across the state.
Oh.
Can you? And that's okay. That's okay. But can you recommend being with the Native Plant Society? Can you recommend where they could go to get information about their specific ecoregion?
The Native Plant Society of Texas now has a plant database, and you can go to NPSOT, Native Plant Society of Texas.org, and it'll come up. It'll be one of the first things you see. Click on that, and you can search by ecoregion. So you can put your ecoregion into the search function, tell them what kind of plant you're looking for. Is it a tree, a shrub, a grass, an annual, whatever? And then let it do the search, and it will pull up plants that grow in whatever ecoregion that you have put in. So it's very, very helpful. If you live in the Austin area, they have a Grow Green little book that they sell. Well, actually, they give them away. The nurseries give them away, and it is very well done. It's featuring plants. It does have some non-natives that we would rather you not use, but it does have quite a few natives. And it just gives you a thumbnail with a little picture of all kinds: trees, small trees, shrubs, perennials, vines, grasses, annuals. They're all there. And everything in there is good for that particular region. And they span the hill country and Blackland Prairie. So I would say go to the NIPSOT website first and put in whatever ecoregion you're in. And you can choose to use either your level 3 or level 4. We now have the level 4 in there. So if you want to be even more exact about which area you're in, you can do that. And what we've done is that we've color coded. Each ecoregion has a color, and we have little dots of color on plants. And so you can, if you want to just go through and look at plants, you can do that. And if you know the color that you're looking for, you will find the plants that will grow in your area. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible.
Okay, that's great. Great information. Thank you. Let's see. There is a question. There's some comments,
Okay.
but there are some questions. The first question is cutting into the curb. Is it legal in San Antonio?
That I don't know, but that picture came from San Antonio. So maybe it is. I would check with the city. I
Okay.
really would.
Let's see. And someone's commenting they're in North Texas, and inland sea oats is very popular with wildlife as well as a lot of the plants you mentioned.
Yes, it is. And it's just pretty. It wants to grow. That's what I like about it.
Okay, someone was asking for the website again, but then Bailey put it in there, put it
Yeah,
into the chat form.
right. It's
So we have that.
npsot.org. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Just more comments. Let me see. Let me check the Q&A box just to make sure we don't have any in there. Oh, yeah, we got it. So let's see.
Well, one of the things I'd like to bring out on the handouts that I sent, I didn't go into all the details because on how to go about all this stuff of deciding on your change of your landscape, but I do have some very concrete suggestions if you will look at those handouts. Um, and one of them is take pictures of things that you like, plants that you like, or landscapes that you like and you think would work for you. You think you're going to remember, but trust me, you're not. So that phone is just an incredible resource.
Okay, let's see. Um, Susan's asking what other disadvantages are there with using rocks as a substitute lawn besides the weeds coming through, especially if the rocks are being used as a replacement in a hill strip? I'm trying to convince a
Yeah.
city management to take up the rocks and put in a xeriscape.
Ah, well, one of the handouts that I sent was on the disadvantages. Quickly, rocks become a heat sink. They get hot in the summertime and then they release that heat at night, which is going to drive your air conditioning bill up. They cause more runoff because they don't absorb like a turf or landscaping would absorb rainfall. So you have heavier runoff when you're using rocks. They don't add anything food-wise for your plants. They're just there. Whereas if you use mulch, a vegetative mulch, not, gravel or whatever, you will get nutrients that will help your soil. So there is several things. Um, the other thing, if you do decide to use them, and you can use them in limited areas, one of the things they recommend is if you've got a really shady area that nothing wants to grow in, that might be a good place to use a rock mulch because you're not going to get a lot of weeds since things don't particularly want to grow there already. And it would keep it looking nice. My recommendation is if you do use any kind of a rock mulch, don't use weed cloth. All weed cloth does is just make your life a little more miserable. Because the weeds are going to come up on top of the weed cloth. They're going to put their roots through it. And then when you come to try to pull them out, it's the very devil to do. I speak from experience. And I was a master gardener for 15 years. And when I put in my decomposed granite walkways around my house, which I love, I put down weed cloth. And I wish I had not. I have pulled some of it out, and that is one devil of a job. But you're going to get weeds. At least do something that makes it easy to get rid of them. You can spray them with agricultural vinegar, which is a 20% concentration of acetic acid. It will kill the tops, and if you're spraying seedlings, it will kill everything. For larger plants, it won't kill the roots, but it will kill the tops and knock them back. So, um, uh, the rocks work great out in Arizona and Nevada because they have kind of rocky deserts. But if you're not in a rocky desert, you're going to have a lot of seeds coming in from grasses and perennials and whatever, and they will come up. And if you have trees around, my next door neighbor had rocks put in, had a landscaper come in and do it several years ago. They just took the whole thing out and put in zoysia grass because they had oak trees and those leaves fell every year. And they were having to be out there constantly with a blower, which would get most of them, but not all of them. And it just looked messy. So they got rid of them. So I don't know if that helps, but the handout that I sent, I do have where I found it. It is on the web, and it is from the San Antonio water system. So you got a city there that you can refer to.
All right, excellent. Let's see. Ted's asking, what is the best way to propagate partridge pea?
I don't know because I can't grow it. So I can't help you there. You might go to Ladybird, to their database or their website. They have a lot of how-tos that you can click into. And I know that on the NIPSOT database, sometimes the plants will have propagation suggestions, but not always. It varies, but it's worth a try.
Okay, I have a couple of more questions. Will the 20% acetic acid kill invading grass? And where does one buy 20% acetic acid?
You buy it at the feed store and some nurseries. It depends. It depends on what kind of invading grass you're talking about. Will it kill like KR blue stem? It'll make it unhappy. It's not going to kill it. It's best for little seedlings that are coming up because they don't have enough of a root system. If you knock down their top, they're not going to come back. And so it works real well. The one warning I would give you is that 20% acetic acid can burn you. So when you use it, put it in a spray bottle and wear a protective glove because you don't want to get it on your skin. And you also don't want to leave it in your spray bottle because it will cause the plastic to disintegrate. So it's more potent than we think. We think vinegar, but this is 20%. It's pretty powerful.
Okay, let's see. Thomas is asking, what plants can be used to choke out pigweed?
Pigweed? That's not a grass, right? Uh,
I think, well, I don't know. I think it's a forb.
I think it is. Yeah, I was just thinking. Um, I think that's when you're going to have to pull or hoe and get out. Now, as I remember, it puts out lots and lots and lots of seeds, so you may have babies. But you can spray it with the agricultural vinegar when they come up, or um, one of the things you can put down is corn gluten. It's a great thing to use to prevent seeds from coming up. Now, I have dogs who dearly love to eat it, so I can't use it. And sometimes the birds will also feast on it, but but it does work. It really does if you get it in before those seeds start to sprout. But for pigweed, I think you're going to have to pull it. I don't recommend Roundup. I really don't. I think it needs to be used very, very sparingly.
Okay, excellent advice. Let's see. I'm switching between chat and Q&A. So, so 1 second. We have a couple of questions here. Thank you for keep those questions coming.
Yeah.
Let's see. Was the blue mist flower the same as Greg's mist flower or something else?
It's a different mist flower. The Greg's is a different one. They're all similar, and I think they're all in the same family. But some of them grow better in different areas. I think there's your difference.
Okay, another question. What is your opinion on recycled tire mulch?
Recycled tire mulch.
Yes, ma'am.
Um, I know they use it in playgrounds, and that's probably a good place to use it. I would not use it in my landscape because it's not going to feed anything in the soil. And it's dark, which means it's going to absorb heat. And in hot Texas, that's not a plus. So I wouldn't use it.
Okay. Ginger's made a comment. We did nurse crop first, winter rye, then partridge pea. So
Okay. Okay. Good to know.
let's see. I do not see any more questions. Oh, wait a minute. One just came in, popped in. Let me find it. Okay, so Mike was saying you mentioned not using fabric. If I'm doing a side yard project with decomposed granite and some rocks with pavers, would you say the same? I've been
I
told it's
would.
necessary.
I'm doing this. I'm saying that because I put in crushed granite walkways around my house, and I wish I hadn't. Because all it does is makes it harder to get the weeds that are going to come up. And I swear everything likes to come up in crushed granite. I get all kinds of good stuff that I dig and then we put it in our plant sales. Um, I've threatened to use it as my seed starter because everything seems to like to grow in it. But yes, I would say forget the weed cloth. It doesn't last very long and it doesn't save your money. And you will save yourself a lot of heartache later.
Okay, and then a follow-up question to that is what would you recommend as the layers? Decomposed granite directly on the bottom?
Now, what else is going to be layered?
Let's see. Wait for them to respond.
Yeah. Yes, I would put crushed granite directly onto soil. And I don't know that I would mix crushed granite with like pea gravel or anything. Pea gravel is a pain to walk on. It's a pain to keep where it should be. Um, I find it just a pain. The crushed granite, once it has been in place for a little while, it kind of gets a crust on it, and it pretty much stays where it ought to be. And I do appreciate that. But everything likes to come up in it. I still like it. I mean, even knowing that, I would use it again.
Okay, and then they did add that the layers are granite, rocks, and pavers. So
I'm
they
not
did add
sure why you would do that. Um, is the granite supposed to hold a rock in place?
I don't know.
Now,
Our plant.
I have used just crushed granite and pavers, and it worked great.
Okay, he's saying the granite is the base. So that would, I guess, go down directly against the soil like you
Yeah.
recommended, and then
Most of the instructions that I have read and used for using pavers is they recommend sand first, and then it makes it easier to level your pavers if you use sand. Um, Crushed granite is not the easiest to move around because it's larger than sand. So I wouldn't, if you're just going to use it as a base, I wouldn't use it.
okay. Another question: are the plants for Gulf Coast? Sorry, moved up. Gulf Coast prairies and marshes different from post oak savanna?
Yes.
And so be sure to go to the websites that were mentioned and check
Yeah.
out those plants that are adapted to that area.
Right. The other nice thing that the NIPSOT database has, they have the map of Texas, and then they have the different ecoregions, both level 3 and level 4, delineated in color. And so it makes it easier to figure out where you are.
Let's see. Another one is, well, it's a comment. I've heard Palmetto St. Augustine is more drought tolerant.
That Augustine is pretty drought tolerant. It's one of the old grasses that we've used for years. I think it's gotten a bad rap. But if you want it to be as drought tolerant as possible, mow it high. Let it have, at least 4 inches of leaves sticking up there because it shades the roots and gives some, keeps the moisture in the ground better.
Okay. Let's see. Some folks making comments about using cardboard as the initial base for the crushed granite as a suggestion. Let's see. And then they're discussing how to do this. They said, let's see, Trisha saying we did rocks on the other half. So I think this is going back to the Palmetto St. Augustine,
Yeah,
and fabric material underneath and a trench under the large river rocks due to the slope.
yeah,
Yeah. So just
yeah,
basically some comments.
right. Different ways to do it.
Yeah, different ways. Let's see. I'll jump over into the Q&A, check to see if there's anything there. Nothing new in the Q&A. So most of the questions and comments are coming through the chat, which is fine.
Yeah.
Let's see. If nutgrass was already discussed, I apologize. I had many times wrong this evening. How does nutgrass come into your landscape, and is there an effective way to get rid of it? The roots are crazy.
Oh, yeah, they are. I hate it. I hate it. My neighbor brought in a ton of nutgrass accidentally in some what looked like really nice mulch. We are still fighting it. Nutgrass, this is one I will use a herbicide on. There is one called, I think it's called Sledgehammer or something like that, that is just for nutgrass. And and talk about crazy. I was just reading through some gardening site, and somebody up in Indiana, I think, was saying, does anybody have nut grass for sale? And I thought, oh, lady, come to my house. It would all be free. She ate the little nuts. So they
That's
were really
interesting.
quite good. So, oftentimes one way to get rid of stuff is eat it. Now, I'm not going to, but it is edible. You've got to get those nuts out. And I cannot tell you how many hours I have spent with a spading fork, pulling up the dirt, going through it with my hands and getting those dadgum little nuts out. But once you get those out and put them in the garbage, they will not come back. But it's tough to get rid of that stuff. So you might want to check some of the specially for sedges, the weed killers.
So yeah, a couple of people have put into the chat, sledgehammer is one and it works. I think you alluded to that. You mentioned
Yeah,
that. And
yeah,
then another one is image, and that works on nutgrass.
yeah,
And then Nadine confirmed that the nuts are edible.
yeah. Well, I mean, different strokes for different folks. That's one way to get rid of it. Eat it. You have to dig up the little nuts to do that, and that gets rid of the plant. I just can't imagine anybody planting it. I was just gobsmacked when I read that.
Okay, and then there's a comment just for everyone. Ed saying that he was in a tropical garden in Hong Kong and he swears they were using nutgrass as a ground cover and it
They
looked
might
good.
have. Yeah. Well, I guess you could. It's Lord knows it's hardy. Um, so yeah.
And then people are commenting about having a nutgrass export business and
There's a market.
yeah, must be. Let's see. Okay, if there's any questions, go ahead and be sure to pop them in there. Let's see, because we'll be wrapping up in about 7 minutes, unless, And also, Deedy, while
Yeah.
people are thinking about what they may want to ask you,
Hmm.
would you like to plug the NISOP conference that you're telling me about?
Yes. We are having our fall symposium, which is our one big state meeting. It's going to be in New Braunfels, which is where I live. It should be wonderful. All of the information is on the NIPSOT website. Um, it is basically a 2-day conference, 2.5 if you come in on Thursday. We do have activities. But we will have field trips. We will have plenary. We have 6 plenary speakers, 3 on Friday, 3 on Saturday. On Saturday afternoon, we're going to do breakout groups where we're running 4 groups simultaneously, and we're doing 4 rounds of those. And it's covering all kinds of topics. The topics are, and you can see all of that if you will go to the website. And I've heard some master naturalists who were moaning and groaning about how much their states get together, I think, which is 2 weeks after ours. Um, Ours is not that expensive, so you're more than welcome to come. We'd love to have you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And in fact, in our chapter meeting, people are moaning, groaning about the registration too. So
Yeah, I've heard a lot of moans.
let's see. The dean is thanking you for the handouts.
Sure.
And I resent those while you're presenting, so
Good.
everyone should have gotten them. And it's pretty amazing. We had over 8,000 people look at the website.
You're kidding.
Okay. No, I mean I was surprised to see that, right? Because it
Wow.
gives you some numbers. And
Yeah.
then we had just about 200 people register, and we didn't have as many people attend. We had
Well, that
over
always happens.
100, but
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah, that
But
happens.
but I have recorded this, and I will send it out if
Okay.
that's all right with you.
That is fine.
And let's
Now, do you put
see.
that on YouTube?
Yes, ma'am. I put it on YouTube,
Okay.
and and I can either make it public or private, and then then only people with the link can find it. But if
Ah,
you have a preference, just let me know.
I don't care. I am I'm an old teacher.
Okay.
If people are interested and want to learn, let them. Bless them.
I'm an old teacher too.
Yeah.
Okay, some more questions came in, so that
Okay.
was gave time for people to think. Let's see. Any advice for deer resistant plants?
Well, I'll tell you what we're doing right now. On our website, on our database, we have taken out any reference to deer resistance because it's just not reliable. If they get hungry, they will eat anything, including cactus. So I helped my daughter we changed her landscape in Austin over to a xeriscape. And we were taking plants out of my yard. They had a lot of deer in the neighborhood where she was living. And so I was taking plants that I thought were pretty bulletproof. And you know what? Those deer like those plants a whole lot. We had to move them to the backyard. So it varies according to the herd, the area. It's just there is anybody that says it's deer proof is deluding themselves. There is no such thing. And it's
Okay.
very frustrating. They get hungry enough, trust me, they will eat it, or they'll try to eat it. Or if you've just put it in, they will taste it, and in doing so, they'll rip it out of the ground. So, Bambi. I
Let's
wish
see.
I knew something.
Yeah, yeah. You can become a millionaire, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Which natives do well in clay soils?
Well, that's where I live. I'm in Blackland Prairie. And if you look up the plants that grow in Blackland Prairie, they will do well in clay. They have to, one of the problems and not problems of clay is that it does hold on to moisture longer because it's such a tiny, tiny little speck that makes up that soil. Um, but and then if it gets really dry, then it cracks and you have gaps in your yard. But that's just what you do when you deal with clay. Uh, the best thing to my advice and what I have done in my yard successfully is bring in lots of organic material. Try to get your earthworms going to kind of loosen that soil. It'll help your plants. And we're learning more and more about what makes up healthy fertile soil, and it's the critters that live in it. And in fact, we've got one of our plenary speakers at the symposium is going to be on building up your soil. So it's a coming field, and I think it's really needed. But it's basically stick with uh, mulch that's organic, not necessarily organic, but vegetative. So you want to avoid, some of the the rubber, for instance. You also want to avoid any mulch that is dyed because the dye that turns it red or black or whatever they've turned it does leach out, and oftentimes it is toxic. So you avoid those dyed mulches if you're going to use any. Just good old normal ground up leaves. Leaves are the best. They really are. Everything. I found out that if you want fireflies, don't grind up your leaves because that's where they lay their eggs and do their thing, and that's where they overwinter. So keep those leaves around, put them in your flower beds. And I have seen some fireflies in my yard now that I've been doing that. I had been mowing them with the mower because it was so easy to pick them up that way. But you can destroy, the life that's in it inadvertently, not meaning to do it. So that's what I would
All
do with clay. That's what I do with clay.
Yeah, excellent advice. Thank you so much for that. Let's see. I will read some of these comments. Let's see. So Cindy says, very interesting and informative. Stephanie says, thank you. Ted says, thanks for the great presentation and handouts. Jewel, really enjoyed this.
Good.
Thank you both so much. Thank you both. Enjoyed this. I didn't do anything. I just facilitated it, by the way. Enjoyed this. Your persistence with the technology is appreciated.
If it can go wrong with technology, I'm your girl.
It says, Susan says, thanks so much for all the ideas, examples, and resources, especially your observations and personal experience. Lots to think about as we keep paring back St. Augustine in favor of supporting our pollinators and birds. Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah.
Deer will taste anything at least once.
Yep.
That is new. Will. They are very observant. And Cindy says the fawns will try to eat anything.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I live in San Antonio and is told I have blackland prairie, but it's not clay. That's a question, I guess.
Well, by definition, the blackland prairie is clay. That's interesting. Maybe in kind of a transition zone because San Antonio, there's just a tongue of the blackland prairie that goes in coming down 35, Interstate 35, ending at about the airport. And there are some other areas that are coming in from the sides, and you may be in a transition zone. So you got a little bit of both. That's quite possible.
Let's see. Rochelle's asking for the dates of the symposium.
It is the second weekend in October.
Check the website, but second weekend in October.
Yep.
Let's see. Trisha saying she's in San Antonio, not far from Vance Jackson and Wurzbach, which are major thoroughfares there.
I know where that is.
Yeah, I grew up there, so I know those roads myself.
Yeah. I lived there for a while.
Let's see. And black clay is, I'm gonna correct the grammar a little bit. And black clay is different. And black clay different than red clay. Pines, lilacs love red clay and hate blackland prairie clay.
Yeah, so there are different clays, but they're all have common qualities. Sticking to everything, cracking when they get dry, holding moisture a long time. But yeah, actually around here, I've got a good friend that calls that red clay the red clay of death. And it was brought in as the fill in her yard, and she's been battling it mightily, but mainly with organic mulches and compost.
Someone's saying do a silt test and perk test. You probably just have deep topsoil. Beth says thank you. Ginger says packed full of info. Thank you. Awesome from Thomas. Great presentation. Thank you. Thank you so much. Many thanks. Very interesting.
Right. That's good to hear. That's really good to hear.
Okay. Few more. If when wet, it sticks to your shovel and makes huge cracks. When dry, it's clay.
Yep.
Soil type, Vance Jackson, Wurzbach.
That's clay in there. I've lived not too far from there.
Yeah, you can also check the soil map for the Natural Resource Conservation Service for your area, Tricia. So that would be a big help to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, check their website. It should be all digitized. Let's see. Well, Joan says, from Joan, my name is not there. I'm not sure what that means. The website would be the Natural Resource Conservation Service.
Yes.
Or nrcs.gov.
Yes.
And they're the folks that do all the soil maps across the United States. They used to be the Soil Conservation Service.
Yeah, they were. No, they've got some really cool stuff. They've got some interactive things. In the Native Landscape Certification Program that NIPSOT has, level 4 deals with a lot of that. It's about stewardship and doing restorations and so on. And so we have a whole thing on how to use that. You got to know what you're doing, but there's a ton of info.
Yes, there is, and they're helpful, and
Yes,
so the maps are well done
they are.
because they'll even tell you the layers of soil and the depth of them and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very
Mm-hmm.
useful information.
Yes, it is.
All right, let's see. It looks like no more questions in the Q&A, and I think people have run out of stuff to ask you. And Mickey, I'm sorry you didn't get to introduce your friend.
Well, that's
Deedy.
okay. That's okay. It was great. I guess I won't see you at the state meeting because I have another commitment that weekend. So,
Well, it should be really good. I'm slightly prejudiced. I was on the speakers committee, and so I had some say in who's there, but we do have some really good folks, and it's a wide variety.
yeah,
It really
it's a
is.
great meeting. It's really a great meeting.
Yeah, it is. It's fun.
But thanks so much. This was wonderful.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So now that I finally got in, I'm going to leave. Thank y'all very much.
Well,
This has been
thank you
fun.
so much for well, one, for your persistence and bearing with the technology. Those things happen. We had a
Yeah.
similar thing today. I don't even want to get into it. But anyway, thank you so much for your time, and
Sure.
have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.